to another exciting episode of Oliver Hazard Perry Construction Series. I'm your host, Jackson Hruschka, and today we are finishing our multiple part series on painting. You're probably asking, why have 3 videos on painting? 2 reasons. Number 1, there are many different steps in the process of painting. It's not as straightforward as you may seem to have a good finished product. And number 2, we're breaking it down and making sure that everybody can follow along properly. So, without further ado, we're getting into the real nitty-gritty. We're talking about sanding and surface prep. As you can see, we have a wide array of things to talk about. And why do we need to talk about this? Well, just like this piece of blue material, there are ridges and bumps. And like this scrubbing pad that you can see, very full of ridges and bumps, that's basically what the cross-section of a layer of paint is going to look like. It's terrifying. There's big pieces, there's chunks, there's holes, and that's not great because that's going to give a texture and it's going to catch the light different, it's going to pool up in some areas. We want that to be smooth. So, to do that, we sand down between priming and paint. That evens out the surface, gets rid of all the extra that we don't need, and then we've got a nice ready-to-go surface. Now, there are primers that you can purchase that don't require sanding. They just don't work as good as primers that do require sanding. Now, there are 2 ways. You have the Scotch Brite method and the sandpaper method. Now, sandpaper has been around for ages. It's always been the same stuff. You know, you have a piece of paper that has grit on it, and the numbers on it, we've got 220, we've got 120. That is how many pieces of grit are in a linear inch. Not in an inch square, but you draw them up in a little line, and the average size of them equals an inch. So, with 220, very fine particles. With 120, also really fine particles. Each one is 120th of an inch. These are a 220th of an inch. So the higher the number, the tinier the particles. For our sanding purposes, 120 is acceptable. It's a little coarse. 220 is a little smooth, like a 180 or 160, because we're just giving this a nice light coating. And then your sanding procedure. You've always seen people grab the piece of sandpaper, put it in their hand, and wiggle around. Your hand has a bunch of flats and valleys. So that means that everywhere that your finger touches is going to sand down, and where it doesn't, isn't going to. You're going to get a really uneven surface. So we have sanding blocks. You can spend a couple of bucks and get this one. It's got a slightly textured back, so it lets the adhesive sandpaper stick to it. You hold it in your hand, a variety of ways. It's a little squishy. These cost a couple of bones. I don't like them. My go-to is a piece of 2x3 or 2x4 that's cut down because you get that same flat surface. Granted, this has had some holes drilled through it and some paint dribbles, but you get a slightly broken corner so you can feather those edges, and you've also got sharp corners if you really need to get up on somewhere. If you got a piece that's really, really smooth, needs to be perfect, use a piece of 1x4. The faces on 1x4 is always going to be nicer than on a piece of 2x4. You can just see that the texture, it's a lot better. So, fancy stuff, not as fancy stuff. And I know what you're saying, Jackson, we have power tools. This is a random orbital sander. It has adhesive back, or if you're really lucky, you got the Velcro back. Hook and loop fasteners, not Velcro, hook and loop. And this spins around in a circle, and it also does a weird figure 8 thing, so that no matter how you're doing it, unless you've accidentally gouged it out, it's not going to move the same way on any face. It just goes really fast. These generate a lot of dust, and they're not super practical for this. Yeah, I know you're saying, but I've got a big piece to work on, and this will go really fast. It will. But this takes a lot really quick. We just need a light. We don't need tons of force. So don't give it tons of force. Now, on the other hand, we have the now ubiquitous Scotch Brite pads. These are not just for cookware anymore. 3M have these cool pads. They have ultra coarse to very fine and ultra fine. I mean, it's basically like the sandpaper, and you use these like sandpaper. You just scrub a lub-a-dub-dub, and that works. So, which one is the best? Depends what you're doing. For taking down all of the burrs and whatnot on paint, honestly, Scotch Brite pads, not bad. They rough up the surface, but they also smooth out big imperfections, and they give you a nice texture. The other great thing about Scotch Brite pads is they don't really wear out. As long as you're using it the right way, you can just sort of put it in your hand, scrub back and forth a few times, and you are done, done, done. They do cost more than sandpaper. This is $3. This is 25 cents. $3, 25 cents. $3, 25 cents. But this wears out. This also wears out, but it takes a little bit longer. And if you're just using it on wood or something, you can wash these, you can vacuum them. Don't throw them in a microwave, but they're fairly reusable. This stuff, limited life. So, what I'm going to do is use Scotch Brite pads. Alright, let's get to the surface.